Alright, sorry about the delay. Welcome back to Mecha Mondays. I'm your intrepid pilot, Fragath, and today we're doing the penultimate installment, with any luck, of the Mobile Suit Gundam novelization by Yoshiyuki Tomino, translated by Frederick L. Schodt. I don't know if he's the one who did the first translation as well as the revised one. I'm not actually sure. Looks like he did both, I think. Assisted by Mark Simmons. Or at least he's acknowledging Mark Simmons. Anyway, here we are. And things are about to get pretty intense. I know things have been kind of intense up until now, but like, some stuff's about to come due. If you know, you know, and if you don't know, you're gonna find out. And it makes novelizations interesting going forward for this series. I still have to get around to reading the fan translation of Zeta. I have it saved on my hard drive. I haven't gotten around to reading it yet. I'll get to it eventually. I can't promise that that's going to be next. I don't know what's going to be next. Hello, Optical Antenna. Thanks for tuning in. Okay, I think I'm just going to get right into it because it's actually a pretty hefty chunk of reading I've got to get through. And the pages are dense. So, what happened last time? Let's see. Plotting happened last time. The crew of the Pegasus 2 have been given a significant degree of additional autonomy and basically have the blessing of General Revel to end the war by any means necessary, which is code for kill Giran, or at least stop his potential superweapon that I'm not sure they know is active, but there's enough spy rumor mill stuff going around that indicates that it's at least a possibility, and the Federation knows that it's a possibility. Both the people of the Pegasus 2, Amaro's group, and Char's group have decided, we may or may not be new types. We're probably not living up to the full new type potential, but as new types, as potential new types, it does sort of behoove us to try and communicate with the other new types before this really escalates out of control, and we are prevented from ever being able to be anything other than, like, military super freaks that are deployed to combat to be just super soldiers. We don't want that. It's not productive, and humanity will never get over being, warlike if we don't go for that. So that's basically the end game right now. Is we're basically in the end game is what I'm saying. It's things are about to get heavy. But before that, I want to say there was something else that I'm forgetting that was kind of important. Oh yeah, there's some plotting on the part of Ramba Ral and his wife, Hamon, not to be confused with Haman Karn, who's a completely different character with pink hair. She shows up in Zeta and is the primary antagonist for Double Zeta Gundam, the third series along. So basically, the way it looks right now, and my memory fails me, is Ramba Ral appears to have basically covertly sent his wife to tell Caecilia, hey, your brother, Giran Zabi, is about to try and kill you. Not because he has any particular love for Caecilia, or any particular love for Giran, or hatred for Giran, but because it's like, this is not productive behavior. You might want to get out of there. Our leader might be dangerously insane, and hopefully you are less so. Or at least he's dangerous enough to make a genuine stab at trying to have you killed. with a super weapon. Um, all at the same time as killing, a whole lot of Federation people. Anyway, I think that's basically everyone caught up. Um, brace yourselves. We're about to take a turn. Chapter 21, Test Firing. Only 3 Federation warships of the White Base class had been built. The Pegasus, destroyed in the conflagration on Texas, the Thoroughbred, and the Pegasus II. Because their solar panels, special hangars, and protruding bridge gave them a winged equine profile, the Zeon military had code-named them all Trojan Horse. They were the only ships in either the Federation or Principality forces specifically designed for joint operations with mobile suits. The Gundam G3 and the 2 gun cannons, C-108 and C-109, stood on the Pegasus II foredecks, beam rifles in hands, like pilots on ancient sailing ships. But in this case, the real pilots, Amuro Ray, Kai Shiden, and Hayato Kobayashi, were inside the giant suits, not on the lookout for reefs. The Pegasus II had just come in effective range of missiles and megaparticle beam cannons from Abo Aku. As Amuro watched, flashes appeared in the sky where the space fortress was located, and then instantly forked into multiple streaks. The pattern was repeated, each time from a different spot, and each time the streaks seemed synchronized. Missile barrages were coming at them from at least 15 different sites on the giant umbrella-shaped fortress and its periphery, creating a deadly crossfire. Because because homing missiles were impractical in regions with high Minovsky interference and saturation, it was common to launch large numbers of conventional missiles in a hit-or-miss approach. But Amuro was certain he was witnessing a new record for the war. Thousands, not hundreds, of missiles were streaking toward them. While adjusting the sights of the beam rifle in the Gundam's left hand, he drew the hyper bazooka on its hip with the right hand. Then he kicked off the deck. On his rear-view monitor, he saw the 2 gun cannons with their twin shoulder guns launch after him from the ship's starboard deck. Both Kai and Hayato had developed more and more confidence in their support role and their basic combat skills, and as soon as they assumed their positions on either side of him, they all plunged ahead in formation into the fire-streaked heavens. Kai and Hayato weren't particularly worried about the incoming missiles hitting them. The missiles were unintelligent, randomly aimed, and traveling in a straight line, so there was no need for the young men to try to intuit or predict complex course changes. They just had to avoid the missiles in time, and that wasn't too difficult. They enjoyed a 280-degree field of vision, and ever since the last battle, their emerging new type skills had allowed them to work in an increasingly coordinated fashion. As they advanced, they occasionally picked off missiles on a course that appeared to threaten the Pegasus II. And every time the mothership safely made it through the ball of light from the explosions, they cheered inside their cockpits.
Hey, Mr. Hayato, it's working!
Not bad, not bad. At this rate, we'll land on the core of Abo Aku and eliminate its commander in no time. What do you say, partner?
Better happen soon. The longer this continues, the worse the odds are for us. My nerves and body aren't going to hold out forever. Let's go, Hayato. Let's go!
They were both excited and primed for action, but they made certain they stayed close to the Gundam. It was easier for Amuro to sight the line of approach of the missiles and evade them visually, so he was able to concentrate most of his mind on the panorama unfolding before them. He knew he needed to locate a dominating presence in the Abo-Aku region, similar to what he had sensed before in his encounter with Dozal Zabi's unit in the Corregidor Shoal Zone. Then he had felt a strange oppressive sensation, interpreted it as a powerful enemy force. Oh, sorry. Then, as in back then, he had felt a strange oppressive sensation, interpreted it as a powerful enemy force, and pursued it. To his surprise, it had turned out to be psychic waves emanating from Dozal himself. Now, if he could just detect the same thing again, he could move in, destroy the source, and in the process help fatally weaken Abo-Aku. Unfortunately, such manifestations of energy were apparently not always well defined, for although he could detect a diffused, seething mental energy emanating in swirls from the fortress itself, he could not isolate a single dominating force. Perhaps I'm still too far away, he thought. There had to be some other reason that the force was not as strong or defined as when he had encountered Dozal Zabi. Then, in the vast area around Abo-Aku, he abruptly sensed a second attacking force, and his eyes widened. He knew they still hadn't cleared Abo-Aku's primary missile defense, but sure enough, there were suddenly more satellite missiles being lobbed at them. These crude projectiles were camouflaged black to avoid detection, and they could attain a speed equivalent to that of modern missiles, but they had a head diameter from 10 to 200 meters. At least a third of the Federation armada behind him was directly exposed. Sure enough, in his rear view monitor, he soon saw explosions flowering like fireworks. "We're coming to get you, bastards!" he yelled at the enemy before him. It felt good to yell something. He thought about the destruction occurring behind him among his own forces, but restrained his impulse to shoot as many of the attacking missiles as possible. He had to save his ammunition for what he expected would soon be a new type showdown with Shar Aznable. Then, while evading a barrage of missiles, he suddenly thought, "Uh-oh." Behind one chunk of asteroid, he saw a brief glint of sunlight on a metal surface and realized he was staring at an entire formation of Gatl fighter bombers with camouflaged fuselages, approaching under cover. Behind them, in a textbook pattern, was a formation of Jiko attack ships. And following the Jikos was the main force of Gaul bombers, reinforcing the defensive wall of Xeon mobile suits and the crossfire from the Abo-Aku fortress itself. General Revel knew the Federation armada could never take Abo-Aku unless it could find or create a weak link in the fortress's defenses. There were therefore three options. Try a feint maneuver and cause the enemy to over-concentrate its strength in one area and thus weaken its defenses in another. To stage a broad frontal assault and attempt to find a weak spot while doing so, or to focus all strength on one area and bore a hole right through the defenses. He knew the third option would yield the heaviest losses, but he chose it because he believed it had the highest likelihood of success. The vanguard of the Armada would first assault the stem section of the umbrella-shaped fortress, where the defensive crossfire was at its weakest, and the Pegasus II, as one of the point ships, would be given maximum flexibility. As the attack proceeded, if an opportunity to make a breakthrough presented itself, it would be allowed to make autonomous decisions and act on them independently. It was a gamble, but he knew what he was doing. After having heard Amuro, Kai, Hayato, and the rest of the Pegasus II crew give their accounts of sensing Dozal Zabi in the midst of battle, he was convinced his plan would work. Even if the enemy were able to muster its own new type unit in defense of Abo-Aku, in the end he was certain the same new type unit would help lead the Federation fleet to the core of the fortress. Amuro had been fully briefed on the plan. Taking care not to let anyone pick him off along the way, he kept his senses focused on the area the enemy fortress occupied and tried to identify the nucleus of its defenses. He switched his main monitor to high-power telescopic mode for a few seconds, and in the distance he could easily see the fortress's silhouette. From his perspective, he was looking up at the umbrella portion of its superstructure. He could almost smell the stench of battle, the stench of impending death. Supreme Commander Girin Zabi's face was intimidating even on good days, but judging from Cecilia Irene's reaction, he knew he must have just scowled particularly hard. Even she, his personal secretary, a strong woman who knew his innermost secrets and his private predilections, was terrified. He stopped reading the letter he had just received and glanced at her trembling form. Cecilia was one of the few women in the world he totally trusted. He had a legal wife, but he considered her beneath him intellectually and treated her more like a domestic, never appearing with her in public. Cecilia was only one of many women with whom he had consorted in the past, but she had proved the most outstanding. Of lower-class background, she had developed a strong independent streak at an early age, trying to become a professional secretary while still a teenager. He had first been attracted to her shapely figure, but he had soon grown to appreciate her ability to understand people and her intuitive skepticism of their true motivations, both traits he had valued highly. After she had worked in his office for over 2 years, he had made her his personal secretary. Cecilia was so accurate in her evaluations of people that Girin sometimes wondered if she might not be one of the new types his sister Caecilia often referred to. She had begun to function more like a counsel or advisor than a secretary, and he in turn had begun to trust in her more and more. He loved her for her ability. Cecilia, for that matter, seemed to like his personality and style, and he liked to think that her affection for him was aided by the fact that he had managed to alleviate a long-standing sexual frustration of hers. She always tried hard to understand his emotional makeup and ways of thinking, and she rationalized whatever he did by borrowing from his system of logic. Several days earlier, she had learned of his plot and seemed to have approved. Humph, Girin grumbled. Imagine these nitpicking numbskull clerks writing code numbers on letters and worrying about format at a time like this. Makes my blood boil. I just want the facts reported, especially for something like this. Cecilia smiled. It was the last thing she had expected Girin to say, but she knew it was his attempt to make her feel relaxed. He, for his part, knew her smile had another meaning. He wasn't supposed to worry about her. He grinned. Did my expression really look that bad? Worse. He grumbled. Well, I never thought things would proceed exactly as planned. He again scanned the letter that had been delivered to him. It was from Vice Admiral Randolph Wiegelman, the commanding officer on Abo Aku, and in the upper left-hand corner was the source of his displeasure. The code name for his plan was displayed in elegant capital letters, followed by the communication number. It therefore made a relatively short message that he wanted as few people as possible to notice, far too conspicuous. The message itself was clear and concise, and merely stated that the Earth Federation forces had recommenced their attack and gave the time. But this information was critical. Earlier, the Federation Armada had bypassed Abo Aku and appeared headed in the direction of Solomon. When one unit had reached the Corregidor Shoal Zone between Abo Aku and Solomon, Girin had staked his hopes on his brother Dozel. But then Dozel's attack had collapsed far too early. Girin's confidence had been shaken to the core by Dozel's defeat. What had happened? What had caused it? Even if Dozel's unit had been surrounded and attacked by the entire Federation Armada, he should have been able to hold out half a day before being annihilated. That he could at least have understood. At the beginning of the battle, Dozel was supposed to have smashed into the wing of the Federation Armada headed for Abo Aku and routed it. Then the Federation armada would have been at a severe disadvantage. It could have been bombarded broadside from Abo Aku, and special Abo Aku units could have been sent out in hot pursuit. In space warfare, an attack from the rear during retreat was to be avoided at all costs. In theory, it could be repulsed with twice the firepower of the pursuers, especially now that ECM, electronic countermeasures, tactics were so refined. Dozel's forces could have been expected to encounter heavy resistance, but at a minimum they should have been able to throw the enemy armada into absolute chaos. And that had not happened. Dozel was defeated too easily, and Caecilia's forces don't seem to have helped him. Girin's doubts began to gnaw in his mind, making him wonder if his secret plot was in danger of unraveling. Surely, he thought, the Federation forces must also have incurred heavy losses. After all, hadn't that been why they had suddenly moved away from the space fortress and retreated to the Corregidor shoal zone in the first place? I hope Vice Admiral Randolph Wiegelman can hold up. Think I'm expecting too much? Girin stared at Cecilia's ample bosom as he spoke, but his mind was focused on something else. It was a habit of his. As he watched, her chest suddenly heaved and then shook softly. Wondering what had happened, he looked up at her soft, full lips. "I I'd say so," she said. She was trembling, and Girin knew it wasn't an act. Normally, Cecilia enjoyed watching Girin plot and manipulate his subordinates to achieve a desired goal. It seemed like a thrilling game, and after the humiliations of her own life, she even derived a perverse pleasure from it. But this time he was going too far. Using the system plan to annihilate both his own sister Caecilia and Randolph Wiegelman was too inhuman, even for her. And the loss, she feared, would be too great, even to Zeon. "I'm not going to be angry with you, Cecilia," Girin said. "I understand your fears. But look, I know what I'm doing. Everything, including acting as a behind-the-scenes dictator here on Zeon, is merely a means to an end in a long historical process. You know, my father often accuses me of being a poor clone of Adolf Hitler, but it's not true. I know what I'm doing. Most people are by nature stupid and weak. They need to fall as far as they can before they can be saved. If Zeon Zum Daekon's prophecy of a new human enlightenment is anything more than a dream, then I'm going to be the one to make it possible. I swing the axe. Those with true new type potential will avoid it. Those without it won't. It's that simple." Girin finished talking, stood up, and walked around his desk to Cecilia. "I think you're going a little too far this time, sir." She had finally dared to say it. Girin's use of the system represented far too big an axe for any single individual to swing. Girin was stung by her remark. "You're getting out of line, Cecilia," he said. He suddenly looked humiliated. "Sorry, sir," she replied with a pained expression. "Please forgive me." Then he leaned over her, and with his lips began gently caressing the nape of her neck. Cecilia felt a sudden chill, a chill of fear. She knew Girin was irritated. She always prided herself on the fact that she never put undue pressure on him, and that she served him well. She knew he kept only capable people around him, and she was always prepared for the moment when he would no longer need her. She knew what had happened in the past to women who knew too much and of whom he had then tired. They wound up ruined or dead. To avoid either fate, she had tried extra hard to develop her skills and make herself indispensable, both as a woman and as his executive secretary. She was, in a sense, constantly engaged in a subtle competition with him, a competition that, since her life was at stake, always had an element of danger in it. And in a perverse psychosexual way, she always enjoyed that. She felt his lips trace the nape of her neck and imagined what life would be like without him. She would lose her biggest competitor, her most worthy competitor. But she knew right now he was just trying to butter her up. She pulled away. Did did I do something wrong? He gingerly asked. Cecilia could hardly believe what she had just heard. For a second, the supreme commander of the Principality of Zeon, none other than Girin Zabi himself, had almost sounded contrite. She quickly recovered and smiled at him.
You're being sweeter than usual. I just wish you'd act naturally.
A frown creased Girin's brow. What are you getting at? He said, suddenly upset.
Well, maybe you shouldn't be in such haste with the project, she said.
Her heart was pounding, and she practically bit her lip when she spoke. Are you trying to provoke me, Cecilia? Don't you understand? If I can just void the Antarctic Treaty, a lot of problems will be solved. If the system works as it's supposed to, then we can nuke the Federation's Jaburo headquarters. After that, it'll all be over. The war'll end in a week. Sorry. Cecilia understood the logic of what Girin was trying to do. Within a month after Zeon had begun its war on the Federation, both the Principality and the Federation had lost nearly half their entire populations. It had been a terrifying loss of not only lives, but also human resources. For losing such a huge number of people in such a short time nearly destroyed most vital social organizations. Civilization had tottered on the brink of total collapse, but then, in a testimony to mankind's resilience, most organizations had been recreated on a new, scaled-down size. The Earth Federation had initially lost far more people than the Principality had, but it had managed to recover faster. It possessed far more people and resources to begin with, and it also possessed a far more flexible political system. But because the human losses had been so horrendous, after the Battle of Loom, both the Principality and the Federation had agreed to sign the Antarctic Treaty, a far-reaching agreement that stipulated the way prisoners were to be treated, and, in a move that had broad implications for the rest of the conflict, prohibited all use of poison gas and nuclear weapons, as well as attempts to totally destroy each other's colonies. The treaty even confirmed possible procedures for terminating the war, but that was as far as the talks had gotten. After all the killing, the two adversaries were simply incapable of resolving their differences over a negotiating table. Their views of each other were poisoned by distrust, and in a world where ideals and realities coexisted, the realities won out. The whole negotiating process was, as Girin Zabi often claimed, a classic example of human stupidity. The paradox of history, he liked to say, was that in nations of laws, even bad laws had to be obeyed, but the laws themselves were made to be broken. Nonetheless, men still legislated, generated endless fancy legal documents, and promulgated worthless treaties. You're good, Warren Steele. Thanks for tuning in.
Appreciate you, buddy.
In the In the 20th century of the old calendar system, Girin continued, the Earth's total population was around 4.5 billion. Do you know what that means, Cecilia?
Well, I suppose you're trying to suggest that even after losing half our population, we still have more than they did then, right?
Right. More people are alive now than there ever were at the end of the 20th century, when modern science and technology made their most dramatic progress. So any talk about too many people having been killed thus far in the war is utter nonsense. The bureaucrats on Earth running the Federation's yes, no, I didn't skip a line. Never mind. I thought I did. The bureaucrats on Earth running the Federation's stupid system aren't helping prepare us for a new type age. They're just getting in the way. They're useless. And so's the Antarctic Treaty. If all it takes to destroy the Federation's Jaburo complex is a couple of nuclear warheads, I say they ought to be used. Someone has to do it.
You're quite right, as usual, sir.
Once I've accomplished my goals, I intend to retire. I'm just thinking of the interests of the survivors of this conflict. Girin put his arms around her waist as if measuring her size. I'm not just doing this for power and glory, you know, he said softly. Cecilia noted Girin's expression. He appeared utterly sincere. Then, he whispered, get me Admiral Chapman Jiro. Well, think this thing's okay, Lieutenant? Commander Shar Aznavour looked over the new model of mobile armor, the Bra-Bro, and wondered if Chalia Bull would be able to pilot it. It was utterly unlike any machine he had worked with before. It was huge, with 4 protruding turrets topped with mega-particle cannon. The turrets could be detached from the main fuselage and used as wire-guided weapons, controlled by gunners inside the cockpit. Normally, it took 4 gunners to operate all the cannon, but the Bra-Bro also had a prototype version of the Elmeth Psycommu interface built into it. As a result, while the Bra-Bro, unlike the Elmeth, could not amplify and project human brainwaves through open space, it could nonetheless transmit them to the cannon units via wire. One advanced new type pilot, hooked up to the interface, could therefore control all the system's cannon over a 2-kilometer radius and use them to attack a bewildered enemy. Even though we've just dealt with the fact that we've already discussed the fact that combat in this setting takes place over dozens of kilometers, but whatever. Um, dozens at a minimum. Uh, where was I? Ah, yes. In fact, the scientists from the Flanagan Institute, just slight inconsistencies, never take any of the spec sheet stuff that you see associated with the Gundam franchise at face value, because none of it works. It's all nonsense. It's like, oh yeah, here's a 120 millimeter machine gun. A what now? Oh yes, it's a machine gun. It's 120 millimeters. Excuse me. Can you dial that back? That's huge. Yes, it is. And that's a machine gun. Yep. So what about that bazooka? Well, let's not talk about the size of the bazooka's bore, because it's also fake. It's yeah, things don't add up. Warhammer 40K historically had this problem as well. Sci-fi settings that take themselves too seriously can sometimes have issues with consistency, is my point. That's not delving into the whole Nazi bait issues that 40K has, and Gundam has to a lesser degree. I've seen people who are unironic Xeon supporters, and I'm just like, guys. They were the baddies. They were definitely the baddies. They were the baddies. Uh, right. In fact, the scientists from the Flanagan Institute had left the Bra-Bro on Abo Aku only because the Elmeth had shown so much more potential. I don't foresee any problem, Commander, Chalia said, grinning and looking a little embarrassed as he stroked a 2-day growth of beard. The Psycommu on this thing's one of the first ever made, but it's easy to operate. I can even do it all by myself. Leroy, Shar ordered Lieutenant Junior Grade Leroy Gilliam behind him. Bring this man a razor, will you? Then he turned back to Chalia and asked, Why don't you just take another Rickdom? Because I want to stay alive, Chalia replied. The Bra-Bro fuselage separates into left and right modules, which allows the cockpit to function as an escape capsule. It'll be easier for me to get out in a jam. It'll be easier for me to get out of in a jam. Something about that maybe doesn't read right. You're joking, I assume. Think so? Chalia said, as Leroy handed him a razor. I want to contact the Gundam as early as possible. The Bra-Bro Psycommu interface actually does emit a small amount of brain waves, and I think it'll help. Well, hmm. Well, I'm not in a position to question your judgment in this matter, Lieutenant, so I guess I'll just have to take your word for it. Shar knew full well that Chalia had been sent to his unit by Girin Zabi to spy on him, and that Chalia was still superficially carrying out his duties for the Supreme Commander. But he also knew Chalia was now on his side. Both men believed in the new type vision and would do whatever they could to make it come true. Both men had also come to realize the need to stop the insane war going on around them. But to do that, they would first have to escape from Abo Aku, and there was not a minute to lose. The Federation Gundam MS was becoming too powerful for them, and after leaving Abo Aku, they were determined to avoid engaging it in direct combat. If they had agreed earlier that if, as they suspected, they were unable to destroy it quickly, they should try to enlist its pilot in their cause. In their next encounter, they would make the decision. Chalia Bull, at great personal risk, had volunteered to try to contact the Gundam. "I just wish I could say this plan'd work with more certainty," Chalia said, sighing. "The most difficult thing," Shar added, "is to get close enough to communicate with the pilot. Think he'll let us?" Leroy Gilliam interjected. "I'll try to help make it possible," he said. "But can I also assume it's okay to destroy him if I have to?" Leroy sounded too eager. He had what Shar and Chalia recognized as youthful overconfidence. "If you can get a beat on him, good," Shar said, "but make sure you aim for his backpack." Then, looking up at the newly delivered Zakus cramped together in the narrow hatchway of the hangar, he added, "At least we'll have some company out there." "Yes, sir," Leroy answered with a snappy salute. Then he kicked off the deck and floated up to the hatch of his Rickdom, climbed in, and began strapping himself into the cockpit. I earnestly don't remember what voice I used for Leroy, so we're faking it. I apologize. It's been a long week. Shar turned to Chalia Bull, especially since he gets like one line, like a chapter that he's been involved, and he's really only had his name mentioned for 2 chapters. So, forgive me. Shar turned to Chalia Bull. Since the two of them were finally alone, he told them what he had learned from Caecilia of Girin's plot. "Holy cow, sir," Chalia said after hearing Shar's description. "What'll these politicians think of next?" "I don't know, but Girin's gone too far this time. He's an intellectual anachronism." "It's not a new problem, sir. He's just following his own flawed ideology." "Think so?" "I know so. He's an idealist, in a twisted way, and he thinks he's laying the foundation for a glorious new age. Unfortunately, he's convinced it can only be accomplished by power, by him dominating all of mankind. What he doesn't realize is that there's another way. He's just stuck in old think mode. He's part of an old problem. 2,000 years of human history prove it." "So why are there people like him?" "Because individual humans are too isolated, too busy thinking about themselves to see the big picture. It's their karma." "Same with us, right?" "Right. It's a big problem, but I think we're on the right track. If I really believed something I was doing would help create a better world for future generations, well, frankly, I'd be ready to die for it. Wouldn't you?" "Whoa, Lieutenant, hold on a second. Don't be in such a hurry to vaporize yourself. Think of all the people you'd leave behind in tears." "No parents, Commander. No wife. No girlfriend. No children. I don't have much keeping me here. But I need something to believe in, and right now I'm ready to follow you. The most important thing to us now is to time our escape right, so we aren't annihilated by Girin. And we need to contact the Gundam and its pilot before it's too late, and either destroy him or enlist him as an ally." "There you go. We've got to watch out for the Gundam. The thing's turned into an over-efficient killing machine. We've both got to stay alive." "Humph. Emerald Ray's the pilot, right? I think you once called him single-minded or straightforward, right? Well, frankly, sir, I'm a little envious of him." "Sometimes it's not a good idea to be too single-minded, Lieutenant." I know, sir. I agree, Chalia said. We're too complicated ourselves, Commander Shar. Or should I say, Casval Dakon? The men shook hands and climbed into the cockpits of their respective machines. 30 minutes later, the 300th Autonomous, Shar's new type unit composed of 1 Brabro, 4 Rickdoms, and 5 Zakus, launched from the stem of Abo Aku and soared toward the combat zone. A new type unit, Shar thought as his Rickdom led the way. It sounds nice, but who knows what it really means? There's no precedent for this. From that point on, he had no time for philosophizing. The entire area in front of him was laced with stabbing beams of light, and he had to concentrate his whole being simply to stay alive. He even forgot about Margaret Ring Blair. He wasn't piloting a Zaku anymore, but he was still the Red Comet. Along with the senior members of Caecilia Zabi's staff, Margaret Ring Blair boarded the Swammel. She knew a military showdown was approaching, for the crew shoved them into the ship's armory like cattle, shouting something about defending Abo Aku to the death. It didn't make sense to her. If they were going out to defend the space fortress, she didn't understand why so many of the officials associated with Caecilia were also being taken away. As she watched, the last senior secretary entered, accompanied by Crowley Hammond. One of the ship's younger officers addressed them.
We may see action any minute now, so until ordered otherwise, you must all remain here in this room. There are normal suits in the locker over in the corner. I advise checking them right now.
With that, he left, closing the hatch behind him. Margaret made her way across the room past her colleagues, over to Crowley.
"Hi," she said. "Tell me if it's my imagination, but things seem to have changed awfully fast around here ever since you walked into Her Excellency's office. What's going on?"
Crowley pulled back with a shocked look.
"How should I know?" she said. "And why don't you mind your own business, anyway?"
Despite the rude rebuff, Margaret stared at Crowley's profile and couldn't help admiring her beautifully shaped nose. Bizarre little interlude thing to include, but thanks, Tomino, I guess. Nose Appreciation Day, let's go! On the bridge of the Swammel, Caecilia Zabi issued the order to leave port. She had been assigned the task of defending the S field around the stem section of the Abo Aku fortress. That's S as in Swammel, as in sarcasm. I realize because I'm speaking into a microphone, it comes across not wholly dissimilar to F as in Frank or falafel. Is that a PH? No, falafel's an F. Yes, we're good. Ah, now I'm hungry. Good work. She had been assigned the task of defending the S field around the stem section of the Abo Aku fortress, and she had boarded the Swammel with every appearance of personally supervising the fortress's defense from the front. Technically, since she had informed neither Girin nor the fortress commander, Vice Admiral Randolph Wiegelman, she was still supposed to be in the S Sector Commander Center. But none of the men who served her objected. They were relieved to see her with them. They much preferred to have her risk her life with them than to have her yelling out orders from the safety of the rear. None, needless to say, were aware she had really boarded the ship in a desperate attempt to avoid being vaporized in Girin Zabi's diabolical plot. Caecilia turned to the con officer on the Swammel's bridge and sternly ordered,
"The Vice Admiral's in the N Sector Command Center, but I want you to make absolutely sure all communications between me and him are routed through the S Sector Command Center."
Then she tried to send a message to Randolph inquiring about the position of Mahal. After several abortive attempts, she finally received a reply.
10 minutes from now, we'll receive supporting fire from Mahal, Excellency,
Randolph said, unaware of what was really being planned.
with the first blast at 30% of potential output. The second will occur 20 minutes after the first. The first one comes 10 minutes from now,
Caecilia asked.
We expect the Federation attackers will be routed after the first blast. The Mahal cylinder will be on the Geldova target coordinates.
From his comments, Caecilia deduced that the first blast was for calibration purposes only. That meant that the second was intended for her.
If the second blast 30 minutes from now doesn't attain target output and doesn't do the job, Excellency, the Supreme Commander has promised to send us reinforcements. An entire fleet of ships is apparently launching right now.
Ah,
Caecilia retorted.
I hope they have a lot of firepower. Surely you don't think he's going to send us help that arrives 2 or 3 hours late and then expect us to thank him, do you?
She asked the young vice admiral to continue sending her information on Mahal, and then unilaterally signed off.
The fool, she thought. He doesn't even know what Giron has in store for him.
Randolph Wiegelman was a somewhat naive officer, and she knew there was no way in the world he could be acting. She ordered her comm officer to keep the laser channel with the S sector command center open. Then, with several supporting ships following in its wake, the Swamel pulled away from the Abo Aku port. Amuro had finally located what he was looking for. From the area in front of him, slightly to his right, he felt a weak force flowing out toward him. Something was approaching at high speed.
I hope I'm not emitting the same sort of energy,
he thought. If he were, he wished he could somehow turn it off, for he knew that anyone else in the area with new-type potential, someone like Shar Aznable, for example, would easily be able to detect him. He knew from books that some legendary samurai warriors had been capable of detecting another's presence, and, conversely, of stilling their own minds in order to mask their own presence. But he lived in the real world, where things were more complicated, where scientists had never even defined human consciousness. It was ridiculous to assume that psychic vibrations, or even the complex presence of new types, could intentionally be controlled or suppressed. He did not want to believe, for example, that Dozel Zabi had some unique ability to generate the eerie, specter-like aura that he, Amuro, had detected oozing from his machine. If that was what a new type represented, he didn't want to have anything to do with it. As far as he was concerned, new types who emitted frenzied, crazed auras were freaks. To be a true new type, he realized, meant far more than merely possessing a simple ability or a talent that others could exploit. It meant being an integral part of humanity. New types were above all human. And human beings were living beings. They were all inseparable. He began to wonder. When an individual's consciousness was raised and expanded, could it exist independently from a physical form at some point? If the ability to generate an independent, free-floating consciousness was a survival advantage in the harsh environment of space, and if only the spirit, consciousness, or some form of thought energy could transcend time and space, would anyone need a physical form? Was the physical body merely a vehicle, or a means of generating an independent consciousness? Even if it required enormous effort and training, Amuro at least wanted to believe that he could somehow control the development of his own consciousness. He had long ago realized that having a special gift did not guarantee a superior or moral character, although people tended to excuse nearly every action of someone they deemed gifted. In his own case, his own much ballyhooed new-type potential was escalating, becoming increasingly independent, assertive, and even dangerous. His insights and his sense of prescience could help him win battles and help him survive. but they were taking him in a totally different direction from the profound shared empathy and spiritual communion that both Lala Soon and Cusco Al had taught him were possible. The more he thought about it, the more confusing it all seemed. Selah Mass appeared to have some traits similar to his. But was he really interacting with her the way he should? Wasn't he just playing the typical male? Did the two of them really wish to have a relationship that went beyond the physical? Were they not simply two healthy young people of the opposite sex, caught up in time compression that occurs in war? Caught up in the time compression that occurs in war, seeking temporary distraction and solace? Ultimately, Amuro knew that he was only a military pilot, and that there was a limit to what he could do. It made him feel impotent and trapped. Philosophize as he might, he had to fight to survive. His only reward was survival. Someone else, he knew, would reap the rewards of his victories. Someone like the Earth Federation leaders, secure in the safety of their underground headquarters in Jaburo. Amuro's thoughts transpired in seconds, but their intensity fueled a new anger in his body that threatened to explode. He cursed, and then suddenly an enemy Zaku came at him from his upper right. "Whoa!" he yelled. He fired, and a single blast from his beam rifle destroyed the enemy machine. The same instant, he spotted over a dozen Jiko attack ships, plunging forth in tight formation from behind the shelter of another satellite missile. He fired 2 blasts from his hyper bazooka and hit the 2 lead ships on either side. Miraculously, the ensuing explosions took out several other ships in the formation. The other Jikos slipped away to the rear, and he knew he wouldn't have to worry about them anymore. They were moving into a zone where battles were raging, but where their likelihood of survival was far greater than it would be against the Gundam. "See you later," he yelled after them. The satellite missiles from Abo Aku were now providing both interference and cover for all combatants in the area. Several Zakus approached from behind one, but Amuro drove them toward Kai and Hayato. At the same time, he was careful to keep his attention focused on the presence approaching from his right. But then a Musai-class ship on his left suddenly turned toward him and fired a volley of beam blasts at him with astonishing accuracy. He was moving through space at maximum combat speed, and because of the magnetic coating on the Gundam's mechanical system, he had over twice the agility of a Zaku. Nonetheless, the beams kept getting closer and closer. It was extremely difficult to knock out a ship with a single shot unless it turned its prow directly toward him, so he aimed his rifle at its main engine. With all the blasts from its cannons, the ship was enveloped in light and hard to see clearly. But he knew what he had to do, and fired. With a whoomp, the Musai exploded like a giant incendiary flare. The light spread throughout the combat zone, illuminating the nearby enemy suits and smaller ships. And in the few seconds before the glow faded, Kai and Hayato were able to pinpoint most of the enemy suits and destroy them. In a superbly coordinated performance, the Gundam and the 2 gun cannons had virtually eliminated any effective resistance in their immediate area. On Caecilia Zabi's warship, the Swammel, the comm officer received a transmission from the Principality.
System now in operation. 30 seconds till firing. Line of elevation ZZ-32XX22. Geldorva coordinates.
The operator on the Swammel bridge yelled,
Abaco, field NA, 323664. Distance 50 kilometers. Think we can clear the area on time? Think we can clear the area on time? Caecilia asked.
From the perspective of the Swammel's bridge, Abo Aku was 50 kilometers starboard to the stern. The captain of the Swammel looked up anxiously at Caecilia. "All ships in the area have received the transmission," he said. "Well, there's such a high concentration of Minovsky particles in the area that the radio is largely unintelligible. I don't know how much of the laser communications have gotten through." Caecilia was nervous, but convinced Girin wouldn't use the first blast on her. When the war was over, if he were impeached and investigated because of the system project, he would need to somehow justify what he had done. He would need to establish that he had intended to use the laser cannon to destroy the Federation fleets and support Abo Aku. The first blast would help establish his alibi. In the operations room of Zeon's General Staff Headquarters in Zum City, Girin Zabi sat down in the spacious leather recliner reserved for the commanding officer. It was his job to push the button to activate what had now been dubbed the Solar Ray laser cannon. And he took his job seriously. It was, in a sense, the final weapon. "Output 28%, approaching 35%. Start countdown. 10, 9, 8. A giant display in the center of the room showed a full view of the Mahal colony. On the right, over a dozen monitors showed the operations room of the battleship Guild, from which the entire Mahal cylinder was controlled. On one of the screens, the strained face of Admiral Chapman Jerome appeared, looking in Girin's direction. Girin acknowledged him with a nod, while noting what a cowardly expression he wore. He had clearly overestimated the man's mettle, and would have to reconsider whatever assignments he entrusted to him in the future. "Zero!" the operator yelled, a little late. Girin pushed the special ignition button in front of him. Whoosh! Girin reflexively shielded his eyes with his hands and yelled in a mini panic, "This is what we get at only 35%? Is the colony cylinder going to hold up?" Despite an automatic exposure control filter, the main display had turned sheer white, and as he stared at it, his first concern was that the cannon might not last long enough to be used in the next step of his plan. Then, as the screen gradually returned to a more normal exposure, the men in the operations room saw the unimaginable. One end of an entire sealed cylinder colony had opened and spit out a laser beam 6 kilometers in diameter into space, creating residual flashes and sparks that illuminated the entire area. The beam was at less than half the output for which the system was designed. But never before in history, Girin suspected, had man generated one so powerful. It took only a fraction of a second for the solar ray beam to reach the Earth Federation armada, but Amuro Ray detected it before it struck. The force that had been bearing directly down on him earlier was suddenly overwhelmed by an immense pressure from his right. He turned his head and in the same instant saw a beam of light split the heavens. Immediately he knew something horrible had happened. In space, even in heavily contaminated areas, laser beams were usually invisible unless they reflected off debris and dust. But he had seen the beam. Behind him, enormous balls of light began to mushroom, as Federation ships in the beam's path exploded. First he counted 12 flashes, then more and more. 18, 20, 23. Could 23 ships really have been destroyed? He was unable to confirm their size, but judging by the magnitude of the explosions, he knew most were at least cruiser class. Then, as the light slowly dissipated, he sensed another, different force pushing at him from behind. It had the same oppressive quality he had experienced once before in his encounter with Dozal Zabi, but it was a compound, overlapping, merging cluster of forces. It was like an enormous howl from thousands of souls on the cusp of death, one that welled outward, disturbing the basic elements of the universe. It is as though 1,000 mouths cried open in pain, perhaps. Uh, he wears his influences on his sleeve. And then again, so did Lucas. Dee-di-di-di-di-dum. There it is. Amuro gasped in awe. He felt he was directly witnessing a physical manifestation of pure hate, something so intense that it could shake the heavens. He began to tremble, and then, to his astonishment, he felt, or heard, an enormous reverberation. It was a force that was not physically supposed to exist. It came out of nothing, and it resonated through a vacuum. It was like the roar of a giant tremor. Even the Gundam fuselage seemed to shake. "Where is it? Where is it?" Oh, geez, one sec. Sorry about that. He opened his mouth to scream, and, the moment he did so, lost sight of the presence he had locked onto earlier. But he was still unable to lose the sensation that had built up in both his ears and his cerebrum. It permeated every pore in his body and threatened to tear him apart. In a futile attempt to ignore it, all he could do was scream over and over again, "Where is it? Where is it?" Over his headphones he heard Hayato calling, "Amuro! Amuro, what happened?" But he couldn't answer. Kai followed immediately, barely audible with all the static in the area, yelling,
Hayato, can you read me? This is Kai. Where's Amuro? I can't see him.
Both men were disturbed and experiencing the same reaction he was, but their voices helped him get a grip on himself. He had to notify them of his position. The three of them needed to stay together, stay in tune with each other, if only to help detect approaching threats. He knew that turning on his 360-degree IFF laser sensors in a combat zone could cost him his life. Hoping the enemy wasn't watching, he nonetheless hit the switch for a second. It worked. Both Kai and Hayato were now seasoned combat veterans, and the instant they detected his IFF signal, they moved to assume their normal formation on either side of him. With the shorter distance separating them, radio communications suddenly became dramatically clearer. "The flashes came from the area where the main Federation force is supposed to be, Hayato yelled. "What the hell happened?"
"I think it was some sort of laser attack," Amuro said. "I'm not sure, but it seemed like it came from the direction of the Principality. I could almost see it."
He was only guessing. He had no idea what had really happened, but the sensation that had made his flesh crawl a moment earlier was now slowly starting to dissipate.
"Amuro!" Kai yelled. "It felt like a cold blast right through my body. What was it?"
"How the hell should I know?" Amuro retorted. "Concentrate on what the enemy's doing now, not on what happened. They're starting to swarm around here."
He wasn't kidding. Suddenly, more and more rocket flares were visible, indicating more enemy ships and suits launching into the darkness out of Abo Aku. And judging by their coordinated movements, none of the Zeon pilots seemed affected by the terrifying force Amuro and his comrades had just experienced. Kai was frantic.
"Damn it! What the hell's going on?"
"Maybe you felt it because you're a new type, Kai," Amuro said sardonically, "but don't let it go to your head."
"Amuro, I'm serious."
Kai was shocked by his comrade's tone, but he intuitively knew what he meant. And he also suspected that Amuro, in his ability to sense what was really happening, was evolving far beyond either himself or Hayato.
"Wish I'd seen the look on your face when you said that," he added, trying to put up a good front.
"I'm not joking, Kai," Amuro added. Once you let your abilities go to your head, it's like filtering reality, and the filter gets in the way.
For most people, it's better to not be aware of the kind of force we just felt. His tone was half scolding now, but then he suddenly interrupted his speech and turned the Gundam's head to the side. A formation of Gattle fighter bombers was bearing down on them. "Here they come!" he yelled as he aligned the sights on his beam rifle.
Sir, Vice Admiral Carroll's entire fleet has been wiped out.
A staff officer announced to an ashen-faced General Revel, seated at his desk in the rear of the Drogs Joint Operations Center.
We suspect a sneak attack with some sort of giant laser weapon, sir. Over 40 craft have suddenly vanished. We've contacted only 2 surviving Coral-class ships, and they're linking up with us now. We're still conducting an investigation, but there appears to be a strong possibility that the attack originated from Zeon itself.
Check what's happening with the Mahal colony immediately,
Revel ordered. His white-gloved hands kept trembling, even though he had clasped them together. He moved them out of sight under his desk and tried desperately to maintain an aura of control.
My God, he thought, staring at the top of his desk. What if we lose the war? I suppose Girin would spare the average citizen, and if he got rid of the Jabro bureaucrats, it'd be no big loss, I suppose. But what if all mankind has to grovel before the maniac for eternity?
Then the same officer spoke again, and Revel heard the words,
"But there's some good news, sir. I'm pleased to report that some of our units, centered around the 127th Autonomous, have reached the first combat line around Alboa Coup."
Revel finally raised his face and tried to sweep his earlier defeatist notions out of his mind.
As long as those kids are still fighting, he thought, I've got to be here for them.
He stood up, and with a light pen on a holographic operations map, indicated the course they should take. Anyone familiar with space battleship Yamato probably has drawn clear parallels between the admiral/captain of that vessel, whose name is eluding me right now, don't worry about it, and General Revel, and they'd be absolutely right. I believe Tomino might have actually worked on that at one point, or one iteration of Space Battleship Yamato. I'm not 1,000% sure. I know he worked on Astro Boy, or Tetsuwan Atom. He probably worked on Space Battleship Yamato at some point. I can't be sure off the top of my head. I'd have to double check. It would not surprise me if he had. I don't know for sure if he did, though, so don't quote me on it. Where were we? Oh, right. He stood up and with a light pen on a holographic operations map indicated the course they should take.
Our surviving fleets, he announced after regaining his composure, will try to breach Alboa Coup defenses after the 127th has created an opening for us. We can assume the Principality has finally fired the secret weapon we've been hearing rumors of, the thing they codenamed the System. It must require enormous amounts of power, so I can't imagine they'll fire it again right away, especially if we use Alboa Coup as a shield. I want an all-out attack on the fortress immediately.
Revel knew that if, as he suspected, Zeon had actually activated a colony-scale laser cannon, it would be futile to try to flee. They would probably be destroyed by another blast even before any Zeon pursuers caught up with them. On the other hand, although the cannon was powerful, it was indiscriminate. During the last blast, several Zeon ships in the wrong area at the wrong time had certainly been vaporized. It would therefore be impractical for the Zeon military to target an area where too many of its own craft were currently engaged with the enemy. The risk of destroying friendly ships would be too great. Oh, the optimism. Why, Revel wondered, hadn't Zeon fired its cannon before the Federation forces reached the Alboa Coup area? It was a mystery to him, and the only explanation he could think of was that the device had malfunctioned.
That's what always happens with new technology, he thought. Preparations probably took longer than planned.
The odds in the battle had clearly shifted in Zeon's favor, and now, because of the laser cannon, there could be no retreat. There was only one thing to do, Revel concluded, and that was to stake everything on a final assault on Abo Aku and hope to occupy it. The prospects for success were bleak, but there was one ray of hope, and that was the 127th. It had already advanced far faster and farther than he had ever thought possible.
It's time, he thought. It's time to stake everything on the Pegasus II and its young crew.
Lieutenant Chalia Bull had known the laser cannon was about to fire. But when Vice Admiral Carroll's fleet was vaporized, he had nonetheless experienced a sensation as terrifying as that felt by Amuro Ray. His Brabro had far more powerful engines than either a Rickdom or a Zaku, so when he detected the presence of the Gundam and two other enemy suits in the combat zone, he quickly moved out in front of Char Aznable. Char made no attempt to stop him. He knew Chalia wasn't hurrying simply because he wanted to engage the enemy. He knew Chalia was operating on another level and following something that he, Char, couldn't detect. He also instinctively knew that the time had come for him to support Chalia in combat, rather than the other way around. It was time to follow the Brabro. He felt connected to Chalia by a thread of consciousness that enabled them to work together as a team. He felt joined by a conviction, a belief in a common goal. They were headed straight toward a dark force that even he could somehow detect. Just when Chalia sensed a faint presence ahead of him and wondered if it might be the young Gundam pilot, the Mahal laser cannon fired. From Chalia's perspective, hell suddenly broke loose. A curdling mass of blackness roared toward him, and he felt his Brabro shudder. As with the Federation pilots in the area, the sensation he perceived was real, even if his machine did not react physically. He instinctively initiated an evasive maneuver, but the force was greater than anything he had ever experienced before. It swept through his entire being, from his brain to his tailbone, rushing like a wall of black static, and threatening to rip his vital organs out of his body. He could scarcely believe he was still alive, for the sensation of living, of awareness of the external world, rode precariously atop a thin layer of skin, which in turn rode atop his flesh and bones, and they were shaking uncontrollably. He burst into sweat, and pools formed around his feet inside his normal suit. His psyche rocked with waves of rage and grief.
I hope I come out of this intact, he thought vaguely, as he stared transfixed at the exploding Federation fleet in the darkness. If I don't start moving, the Gundam'll destroy me. I've got to move. But if I die now, the terror will vanish. And what's wrong with that? That might be better.
Then then there emerged a more sobering thought, that even death might not be an escape. If there were an afterlife and his soul survived, it would be permanently scarred. His thoughts were an internal scream of despair and an attempt to dispel his growing fear. The next instant he returned to his senses and became acutely aware of the sweat-caked underwear clinging to his skin. He did a quick 360-degree scan of the area in which his Brabro was drifting and decided he was in no immediate danger of being sniped at by the Gundam. But he knew he had to hurry before another blast came from the laser cannon. He had some business to take care of, and its importance transcended everything else. It was not yet time to die. He checked the area once more and then heard, amid the static generated by the Minovsky interference, a near scream from his commander.
Chalia Bull, hurry!
Char Aznable yelled from his Rickdom. Chalia knew then that Char, too, had experienced it. All crew, concentrate on assigned tasks. No wavering now. The enemy's in front of us, not behind. Bright, standing erect on the bridge of the Pegasus II, scolded Mirai and Sayla on either side of him, and when he did so, his mic, still switched to ship-wide, picked up and broadcast his words throughout the entire craft. Immediately after the laser cannon's attack, several of the crew had experienced the same force as Amuro, Chalia, and the others. Some had been literally thrown out of their seats. Sayla Mass had clung to her comm panel for dear life, trembling in sheer horror. Mirai Yashima had managed to hold the ship's helm steady, but had nearly vomited on it. Others, such as the ship's operators Marker Clan and Oscar Dublin, and Bright himself, had felt the force but had not been affected so deeply. Mirai, with spittle flying, yelled back at her skipper,
That felt like a wind from hell, but it's not the sort of presence a true new type would generate.
Behind her normal suit visor she looked deathly pale, with her eyes starting to roll upward. She looked half crazed.
Some didn't feel a thing, Bright shouted, swallowing hard. They're the ones in real danger now. We don't have a moment to lose. Just keep your eyes on the area we're heading into.
Oh my God,
Mirai groaned. Bright had been right. A formation of 6 Gatl fighter bombers had already slipped through their starboard side defenses. She spun the helm and the ship heaved to port. She knew intuitively that fear was her worst enemy. Fear was the mind killer. Fear was the little death that... Oh, sorry. I'll stop. The little death that brings total obliteration. I will master my fear. I will let it flow. Never mind. Dum. Where are you? She knew intuitively that fear was her worst enemy, that it could kill her, and she desperately tried to separate her paranoia from reality. She wished she could wipe off the spittle splattered on her face, but to do so she would have to remove her helmet. Then she heard a whoomp. On a central monitor, the officer of the deck screamed,
We've taken a hit in Sector 362. Wait! Looks like a Gatl fighter bomber crashed into us.
Following his words, a computer graphics simulation of the damage appeared on screen. On the double! Bright yelled, sounding slightly hysterical. I want wall film applied immediately. Sailor, double-check the lines to all anti-air observation ports. He knew he had to calm down. His psyche had been rattled by the force earlier, perhaps not as much as Sayla and Mirai, but it had nonetheless slammed into his mind and rocked him. He knew the most important thing now was to help the core crew regain their senses, and that the best way to do that was to bark orders at them. Never change, Bright.
Yes, sir.
Sayla shakily answered in response to his order. Her pupils were still dilated and trembling. She had suddenly become incontinent.
Shaw's on his way, Bright shouted. Think of something we can do.
His words seemed to have an effect.
Yes, sir, she replied, checking anti-air observation posts.
She turned to her comm console, suddenly looking very frail.
Mark,
Bright yelled out to the ship's operator,
find out what happened behind us, immediately.
Yes, sir,
Marker replied.
Working on that right now. I know it sounds incredible, but it looks like Vice Admiral Carroll's fleet was hit by some sort of laser blast.
Sailor, Bright barked, open a radio channel for me.
Yes, sir. Channel open.
She switched an all-range radio channel over to the receiver on the captain's seat, and out of the corner of her eye saw Bright fiddle with some controls on the front of his normal suit. Turning to Mirai, she quickly asked,
Can you feel it? Is it Char?
Looking doll-like in her normal suit, Mirai replied,
No, not yet.
Sayla leaned over and stared out the bridge window at the panorama of open space. In the center, beam blasts from the Pegasus II's main cannons were pulsing toward Abo Aku, and on either side, beams and regular fire from the other ships in the fortress crisscrossed through the blackness, punctuated by explosions. And in the midst of this visual chaos, she sensed an enormous upheaval of the human psyche. Instinctively, she knew. Someone else, not just the men and women of the Carol fleet, will die. Someone else! But much to her chagrin, she had no idea who it would be. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you a classic case of foreshadowing. It's maybe a little ham-handed, but it's okay because the book's kind of done this already, where it's kind of like made implications well before it's happened and basically spelled out something's about to go down. I'm not going to tell you how it's going to go down, but it is. So the description they have here, um, Sayla leaned over and stared out the bridge window at the panorama of open space. In the center, beam blasts from the Pegasus II's main cannons were pulsing toward Abo Aku, and on either side, beams and regular fire from other ships, and the fortress crisscrossed through the blackness, punctuated by explosions. Um, I can see that in my head. Like, if you've watched the series, you know exactly what's being described. Um, I really have to give credit for having the consistency of vision to describe something you've already animated, and also to animate it in such a way that you can describe it. It's fairly remarkable because I've seen things nowadays where it's like, well, it's a visual mess, but in this, it's pretty crisp. Anyway, give me a sec here. Chapter 22, Aboaku. The southern sector of the Earth Federation Space Force's frontline base, Luna 2, was used to house refugees, almost all of whom had been mobilized to work in support of the military. Fra Bo, Amuro Ray's childhood sweetheart from Side 7, was degreasing the critical parts of over a dozen Elikars when she suddenly felt a chill surge through her body. It was so strong and her limbs shook so hard that she nearly lost her grip on the equipment she was operating. For a second she wondered if she had contracted a particularly virulent form of the flu, but she quickly decided otherwise, for it was too intense. With lips trembling, she turned to Ryum, her aging co-worker on the line, and asked, "Excuse me, but would you mind taking over for me for a minute?" Ryum took one look, instantly knew something was wrong, and told her to go lie down. The dozen meters or so from the degreasing machinery to the employee rec room seemed to take forever. Fra's heart began to pound, and she gasped loudly, gulping in the dusty factory air, which only aggravated her burning throat. As if in a dream, she heard someone behind her yell, "She needs a doctor!" and only faintly realized it was Ryum. She reached the rec room door, groped for it, opened it, and staggered over to the vidphone in the corner. "I've got to talk to someone," she thought, as she collapsed on the sofa beside the vidphone, receiver in hand, shivering and feeling weaker and weaker. "Cats!" she groaned, calling out the name of the eldest of the three young war orphans she cared for. Later, she would hardly remember if she had even made the call or not, for both her mind and her body seemed to have been temporarily paralyzed. But she did hear the voice of a child with a healthy pair of lungs calling out to her, saying,
"Hey, Fra, what's going on? Fra, what happened?"
After what seemed an eternity, she mustered up enough strength to respond.
"Cats," she whispered, "I need you to come here. Just be with me for a minute. I'm in the factory rec room area. Cats."
Out of the vidphone speaker she faintly heard the young boy's voice calling once more, saying,
"Fra, what's wrong? Fra, I can't see your face."
and then, as he apparently turned to his daycare worker,
"Teacher, something's wrong with my mom."
Amuro, Amuro, Fra thought, why aren't you here with me? She wondered if she would ever be able to understand everything he and his crewmates were going through. And then she drifted into unconsciousness. Amuro, I'm wearing some lipstick today. For you, Amuro, for you. I've been trying it for you. Funny, huh? She felt indescribably lonely, and suddenly she desperately missed the warm touch of her young charges with their soft, smooth, alive skin. Aboaku, 11 o'clock. Down 23 degrees. Relative speed, 0. Amuro knew they were getting close. Damn! He spat as he pulled the trigger of his bazooka one more time. In a fraction of a second, a shell tore into yet another Zaku's armor and ripped it apart in the nick of time. The combat was so close in now that he had to disengage immediately or risk being caught in the ensuing blast. What? Suddenly he heard a high-pitched sound, as if something were calling him. He looked up over his right shoulder and to his astonishment beheld the fiercest-looking model of mobile armor he had yet encountered. And he was alone. Kai and Hayato were deployed off to his right and left, excuse me, epiglottis is doing something weird. Kai and Hayato were deployed off to his right and left, but at that very moment their thoughts were not linked, and he knew that it would be several seconds before they realized what had happened. Seen from the front, at a distance of 300 meters, the Brabro appeared to have one twin megaparticle cannon atop its fuselage, and 3 underneath. But that, he quickly surmised, was probably deceiving. In reality, it might have even more. The machine looked as if it had been there all along, just waiting for him to turn around and notice. Why didn't I sense it come up on me? He wondered. There was no time to hesitate. He yanked his right-hand lever and put the verniers in the Gundam's legs on maximum thrust. He had to get out of the enemy machine's line of fire as soon as possible. On his monitors, he saw the Brabro fuselage shudder and take off in pursuit of him. Then he suddenly heard it. Amuro! He had his normal suit headphones set to combat range, but with the Minovsky interference, he could usually hear only static. The voice he heard now was clear as a bell, and not coming across on radio. And neither Kai nor Hayato appeared to have noticed it. Then he heard it again. Answer if you are Amuro Ray. Chalia Bull detected shock from Amuro and immediately knew he had made a mistake. He had approached the Federation pilot too abruptly, in a combat zone where MS pilots had to expect to be attacked from any direction at any time. But it was too late to turn back now. He projected his thoughts toward Amuro in a torrent. Fighting here is pointless. We must leave here immediately. We have other work to do. We need your help. We want to enlist your new type talents in our cause. Almost immediately, Chalia picked up a sharp, reflexive response, but he overinterpreted its true meaning. He mistakenly assumed the response came because Amuro was far more advanced as a new type than either Char Aznable or Cusco Al. In the process, he forgot that people have both rational and emotive components to their beings, and that Amuro might not have been in a position to ponder the meaning of his words, and might only be sensing angry, garbled thoughts. Chalia simply knew there was no time to spare, for the laser cannon might fire again in 10 minutes and take everything in its path with it. He tried again. We are both MS pilots, but this war won't be settled by us killing each other. We must bring it to a resolution, and we need your skills to do it. Commander Char Aznable and I are about to leave this combat area in an attempt to overthrow the Zabi family. We need your help. If we can destroy Giran Zabi, we can end the entire war. All other problems we can deal with later. Amuro Ray, you and your comrades are like us. Follow us out of this area toward Zeon. Follow us before we're all destroyed by the system and the solar ray cannon. Had Chalia's thoughts arrived as concrete, audible speech, Amuro would no doubt have understood and responded as Chalia hoped. Sayla, after all, had told him her brother could be trusted. Moreover, Amuro and other members of the Pegasus II crew had even discussed something similar to Chalia's proposal among themselves previously. And General Revel, albeit in a rather oblique way, had given him and the others virtual carte blanche to conduct the war as they saw fit. But to Amuro, Chalia's thoughts were merely alien. Chalia's words were based on Chalia's own logic, which was in turn based on Chalia's personal reality, and when they were compressed into a torrent of pure thought instead of speech, the logical integrity of the statements was lost. To digest another individual's unique reality took time. To convert understanding into action took even more time. To expect it to happen in seconds was to expect the impossible. The problem was compounded by two factors. First, thousands of Amuro's Earth Federation comrades had just been incinerated by Zeon's attack, and their souls remained unavenged. The emotive component of Amuro's personality was thus nearly frozen with terror, blocking and warping his logical thought processes. Second, Amuro was infinitely more advanced than Chalia, and during his encounters with new types such as Lala Soon and Cusco Al, a discrete part of his mind had been activated, making him hypersensitive. The intense, urgent tones of Chalia's delivery felt like a violent assault on his psyche. Therefore, the more urgently Chalia tried to communicate, the more Amuro was overwhelmed, and the more it felt like his mind was being raped. Why did Chalia attempt such an untested form of communication? He excelled at intuition and insight, and, with Shar Aznavour, had occasionally succeeded in communicating his thoughts. But above all, he was desperate. "I know you're a Federation new type. We need your help," he projected again. Amuro cursed in rage, and with computer-like reflexes turned his hyper bazooka toward the Brabro and fired twice. With the aid of the new magnetic coating on the Gundam's moving parts, he was able to move faster than ever before, firing again before confirming how his first shot had performed. But somehow the Brabro managed to evade his attacks. It slowly dawned on him that his opponent also possessed an extraordinary ability. The next instant he was caught off guard when a volley of megaparticle beam blasts stabbed forth at him from a point several hundred meters away from the Brabro. He fired the jets in the Gundam's backpack and feet and spun his MS to the left. "He hasn't perfected his aim yet," he thought. "He's still wavering. But where will he fire from next? Could there be another machine around here?" He intuitively sensed that the megaparticle blasts had been fired by the same person whose thoughts had assaulted him earlier. But because he did not know the mechanism that the Brabro employed, he had to assume the possibility of another machine. And then it dawned on him. It was like the Elmath, with remote units it could control. The only problem was that he could not detect the crisscrossing brainwaves that normally would accompany such a system. "What's going on?" he wondered. The Brabro initiated a zigzag evasive action, with Chalia Bull still emitting powerful thought waves in Amuro's direction, trying to establish direct contact. "I am Chalia Bull, an ally of Commander Shar Aznavour. You must help us. We must not fight each other." To protect himself, Chalia kept firing restraining blasts in the gray-colored suit's direction, but it kept tearing toward him, weaving in and out in an utterly random pattern. And from the powerful psychic waves being discharged, he knew the elusive young pilot inside was highly disturbed. What he did not know was that his thoughts registered on Amuro merely as angry screams and amplified his growing outrage. Nor did he know that Amuro was desperately trying to comprehend the mechanism of the Brabro from its silhouette. Why are you so angry? Calm yourself and listen to me. Then Chalia fired 2 more restraining blasts from the megaparticle guns on his remote right unit and accidentally revealed his secret. Amuro finally realized why the beams were coming at him from different directions. The machine in front of him was connected by wire to remote auxiliary cannon units. The units, separated from the main fuselage by several hundred meters, were independently aimed but not emitting psychic energy on their own, as with the LMF bits system. That was why the psychic force directed at him was focused and coming only from the main machine. And that was why, Amuro also realized, the system was so dangerous. Unlike the LMF bits system, these remote units could approach and attack him unnoticed. Amazingly, whoever was piloting the machine was trying to contact him, Amuro, at the same time he was operating the units. Amuro lashed out at his enemy with a mental scream.
Don't let it go to your head, new type!
Chalia was stunned. Had he had too much faith, he wondered, in his ability to communicate with the Gundam? Had he made a colossal mistake? The young enemy new type was far more sensitive and emotional than he had ever imagined. Bitter and angry at himself, he began to edge away in his Brabro. And then it happened. Hayato noticed the Brabro and took off after it in his gun cannon in hot pursuit, firing his beam rifle. "Where'd that thing come from?" he yelled. "I never saw anything like it." Kai also spotted the new enemy, but he had to take care of an attacking Zaku first. He knew his buddy probably couldn't hear him, but he yelled,
"Watch out, Hayato! It's a new model of mobile armor!"
Hayato closed in on the Brabro, carefully aiming his suit's twin 28-centimeter shoulder cannons. The Brabro appeared to see him and began sighting its 4 cannons. Then Hayato fired, and the near impossible happened. The blast from his guns met head-on with a beam from one of the Brabro's remote megaparticle cannons, and a huge ball of light erupted between the 2 machines and swirled into space. Stunned, Hayato put his gun cannon into retreat, but the flames from the exploding unit overtook him, scorching his suit and blowing it backward. Amuro also took evasive action, but he knew he had to stay in range of the Brabro. Somehow he had to find a weak point in the enemy system. He wanted desperately to warn Kai, Hayato, and his crewmates on the Pegasus II about what was really going on. He knew his radio transmitter wouldn't work, but somehow, he thought, if his comrades had new type potential, they just might understand him. He screamed,
Watch out! There's a new type out here!
Instead of peaceful psychic communion and universal awareness, Amuro's new type of reality had become one of confusion and contradiction, of space combat fatigue. His scream was one of terror. Had he been a soldier in another age, fighting in the trenches on Earth, he might have had a few seconds to ponder the significance of Chalia Bull's actions. And then things might have taken a different course. But he was surrounded by 360 degrees of wide-open space.
The red comet's out there.
Sayla's clear, urgent voice echoed in the headphones of Lieutenant Junior Grade Slegger Law's normal suit. But try as hard as he might, he couldn't see anything in front of him other than the lines of fire he was directing toward Abo Aku. Nonetheless, he yelled at his men manning the laser sensors.
Keep your eyes open, he barked. If you see anything moving super fast out there, it's the Red Comet.
Sometimes Slegger had to slap his men. Sometimes he even kicked them. But he always made sure the ship's guns kept firing. The monitors above the scopes had a super telescopic mode to monitor hits scored on the enemy, and although the images were of fuzzy resolution, he knew the guns were reaching their target. What he could not tell was whether they were inflicting any significant damage. The more he thought about it, the more Sayla's ability mystified him. He still couldn't see a trace of the red comet. On the Pegasus, Slegger usually played the obnoxious boor, but he prided himself on his own common sense. After the meeting with General Revel, when Sayla had revealed her connection to the Daikun family, he had been careful not to broadcast her secret to the rest of the crew. He would have liked to, of course. He didn't feel comfortable with the idea of someone with her background not being under surveillance. But he knew that his suspicions also stemmed from a perverse curiosity. Deep down inside, he believed she could be trusted. By nature, Slegger always empathized with the misfits in any group. No matter what Sayla had done in the past, no matter how diffidently, yes, diffidently, no matter how diffidently she occasionally acted toward him, he knew she could handle just about any situation. If not, she never would have hooked up with someone still as wet behind the ears as Amuro Ray. She was an adult and knew what she was doing. If they got through this battle without being betrayed by her, he fantasized, he might steal her from Amuro and bet her himself. In a rare moment of serious reflection, he decided she would be worth it. But if you turn out to be a traitor, Sayla, he thought with a chuckle, I'll strip you naked and feed you to the cold black vacuum of space. Then, suddenly, Slegger felt a strange sensation pierce his forehead. Shar? He quickly scanned the heavens once more with his scope monitors. Something was still reverberating in his mind, leaving an almost visible trail behind it. Is this it? He wondered. Is this what Mirai and Sayla have been talking about? The presence or force they mentioned? To his astonishment, there, in an area where nothing had been visible before, he saw something flash with a reddish hue. If he could have, he would have fired the Pegasus's main cannons at it, but he knew the light was coming from a combat zone where their own suits were involved in a melee with the enemy. He felt helpless. What's going on with the Gundam? Bright yelled in Sayla's direction. She was dressed in her normal suit, monitoring the comm console, and from her position she couldn't easily tell what was worrying her skipper.
No change, sir, she reported. At least it seems that way.
She was carrying out her assigned task to the letter, her voice clear and steady, without betraying the slightest hint of her own feelings. Operators, Bright barked. What's happening?
Both C-108 and C-109 appear to be doing fine, sir,
Ensign Oscar Dublin replied, checking the left and right displays he always monitored from his perch. Then a near scream suddenly came from Mirai Yashima, startling everyone on the bridge.
Red Comet!
She yelled, staring out the window.
Closing in on us!
Ensign Marker Clan, the ship's other operator, answered right after her.
Port side, 2 suits, 11 o'clock, 2 minutes, up 27 degrees.
For a moment, the Pegasus crew feared their ship was finally about to fall prey to the Red Comet, but Mirai had overreacted. The 2 suits approaching were Rickdoms belonging to Lieutenant Junior Grade Leroy Gilliam and a fellow pilot. Oh, jeez, I'm out of water. Give me 30 seconds to grab some more water. 1 sec. Sorry about that. Normally I'm better prepared. I felt kind of dehydrated all day. Might be from yesterday. Where were we? Oh, yes. After weaving through the Pegasus's defensive fire, Leroy finally got his first close look at the ship's unique shape. He could understand why Xeon pilots called it a Trojan horse, but it was far more elegant than he had imagined. Compared to the videos that Xeon scouts had brought back in the past, the real ship looked delicate, ethereal, almost fantastic. Leroy was an artist by training, and the Pegasus aroused mixed feelings in him. He was envious of its beauty, and felt enormous respect for the Earth Federation for having adopted such an incongruous design for its new type unit. Suddenly, the enemy seemed far more creative to him than the Principality of Xeon. How can we possibly win against the Federation? He wondered, as he fired a blast from his beam bazooka and immediately initiated evasive maneuvers. Damn! His blast seemed to have had no effect. The ship was still steady on course. Perhaps he had aimed at the wrong spot. His job was to gain time so Char Aznable and Chalia Bull could approach the Gundam, and he had interpreted his orders to mean that he should avoid hitting the ship's bridge. The crew of the Trojan Horse, after all, might be the very new types they would want to enlist in their cause. There was no concrete evidence to support this theory, but he wanted to believe it. The ship's defensive fire was so intense he couldn't get in any closer. Geez, what am I gonna do? Leroy cried inside his suit. If the commander doesn't decide what he's gonna do soon, I'm gonna be fried. Tailing the Bra-Bro in his Rickdom, Char Aznable realized his plans were starting to unravel. He began to worry that he might have put too much faith in Chalia. The initial contact with the Gundam hadn't gone well, and Amuro Ray's reaction had been far too intense. Char hadn't been prepared for that. He had been stunned himself by the solar ray attack in much the same way Amuro Ray must have been. He, too, had trembled in fear, but he had thought that the attack would have made enlisting Federation new types in his cause easier, rather than more difficult. The combat zone where the Bra-Bro and the Gundam now faced off was interlaced with bands of fire and waves of psychic confusion. What the hell's going on? Char thought with irritation. He jammed his Rickdom's power levers for maximum thrust, and the flares from the rocket engines in its skirted base suddenly widened dramatically, sending him accelerating toward the Gundam so fast that for a moment the four Zakus following him imagined he might enter a sci-fi warp speed. They didn't try to keep up, but instead deployed themselves in the battle zone to keep hostile suits and ships from entering the area. The Swammel and 3 escorts waited on standby alert 10 kilometers out from Abo Aku. From Caecilia Zabi's perspective, on the bridge of the Swammel, it looked as if the Earth Federation forces were going to make a suicidal attack on the space fortress. Warships under Vice Admiral Randolph Wiegelman's command, she therefore assumed, would converge along the first combat line in the S field, which, in the three-dimensionality of space, meant that her unit would be assigned the top of a cone-shaped defensive perimeter.
Now's our chance, she muttered to herself. But where's that damned Char Aznable? It's been over 5 minutes since the first solar ray attack.
A communications officer handed her an envelope and announced, We've received a communication from the S-Field Command Center, Excellency. It's been forwarded from Randolph Wiegelman. He's requesting acknowledgement. Caecilia carefully read the message. She knew the Vice Admiral was still unaware she had left her command post and boarded the Swammel. She turned to her ship's captain and ordered,
Send 5 squads of Zakus out in front of the Swammel. This ship is to be part of the final defense line and is supposed to move forward another 10 kilometers. That's an order from the command center. Understand? Take us forward slowly as possible.
She sent a reply to Randolph indicating she understood his communication, but sent it via the S Field command post to make sure he would think that she was still there. Then she performed an urgent check on the progress of the 300th, Char Aznable's unit.
I wish I knew what my damn brother's plotting now, she thought.
She still had no concrete proof that Girin was planning to hit Abo Aku next time. A young lieutenant from General Staff then brought her news of Federation losses. We have almost certain reports that 2 Earth Federation divisions were annihilated in the earlier attack, Excellency.
And what about our losses?
2 battleships, 7 heavy cruisers, 6 light cruisers, and an unknown number of other ships missing, Excellency. If the reports were true, Caecilia knew Revel had lost nearly 1/3 of his entire armada. But in spite of that, his forces were pursuing their attack with equal if not greater ferocity. With their rear escape route cut off, and fearful of next being broadsided by another blast, they were probably desperate and hoping to occupy and use Abo Aku itself as cover.
And General Revel, she asked, was he eliminated too?
We have no confirmation of that yet.
Any evidence of long-range nuclear weapons being used by the Federation?
Not yet, Excellency. We consider it highly unlikely that Revel himself would violate the Antarctic Treaty. Something about the soft tone of the young man's voice angered Caecilia.
We're at war, Lieutenant, she reprimanded him. We're not playing games. Never assume anyone will follow any rules.
Yes, Excellency, the officer stammered in reply, his face reddening. We simply have no indication that any missiles have been intercepted but in the minefields protecting the fatherland. It was a feeble attempt at self-justification.
And have you personally verified this? Caecilia yelled. If not, get out!
Some of the officers from General Staff seemed to have no idea how much Minovsky particles, which absorbed radar and radio waves, could distort all information. It was depressing to think how many men like him there were around her.
Well, she demanded of the ship's starboard operator, any contact with Shah yet?
Not yet, Excellency, came a nervous reply. The operator was having a hard time. The area in front of Field E was now bathed in dazzling light from a full moon and the explosions of combat, which made using a telescopic lens to search for the enemy extremely difficult. This was one time Caecilia wished for a layer of air, which, by blurring far-off objects, would at least provide a better sense of distance.
Things are going too well for Girin, she thought.
Because General Revel's attack was advancing too fast, Girin could use the second solar ray blast to aid Abo Aku. If it so much as creased the space fortress, there would be huge principality losses, and Caecilia and her forces would probably be destroyed, but Girin could claim it had been necessary to save the fortress. Revel was handing Girin a golden opportunity to execute his diabolical plot without having to incur an iota of guilt.
Damn you, Revel,
Caecilia cursed under her breath.
Disperse your forces or you're digging your own grave, and mine too.
She turned to the ship's operator again, shook her fist, and screamed,
Where's Commander Shah?
Omnidirectional attack described the Brabro when it deployed its 4 wire-guided cannon units the maximum distance and then struck the enemy. Lieutenant Chalia Bull had already lost 1 of the lower cannon to the Gundam, but he still had 3 left. Only a few seconds earlier he had appealed to Amuro to flee the area and help him in the campaign to destroy Girin. But now his mind was filled with murderous thoughts. Instead of restraining blasts, he was desperately trying to destroy the enemy suit. Ironically, Chalia's change of mind helped shock Amuro out of his confusion and helped him suddenly concentrate on the reality of combat. He saw an apparition-like cloud ooze out of the enemy machine, just as he had from Dozle Zabi's Big Zam. It was not as dark, but he knew it was a manifestation of the pilot's combative mindset.
You bastard! He screamed inside his cockpit. What the hell do you think you're doing? Trying to kill me with black magic?
In spite of the deliberate randomness of the enemy machine's movements, he had already deduced a pattern in them and realized how the omnidirectional attack system worked. Excuse me. Chalia Bull was momentarily distracted. Two enemy suits, gun cannons, suddenly assumed positions above and below the Gundam. Then one swept up at him from below with its shoulder guns blazing, while the other attacked from above. Had the three enemy pilots been of ordinary ability, he could have destroyed them easily with his remaining independent wire-guided cannons. But these were new types. Amuro's nervous system went into action, and because he was a new type, he was capable of moving with blinding speed. Taking immediate advantage of the confusion he sensed in the Zeon pilot, he instantly drew a bead with his beam rifle and fired. A narrow beam of light zapped out of the rifle barrel and seared a gaping hole in the enemy machine's cockpit. In the instant before he evaporated from the full force of billions of searing megaparticles, Chalia Bull's last thought was one of pure shock, and a belief that he had been shot by a mentally deranged new type. Then the Brabro's main engines blew, and the entire machine flowered into a ball of light. Kai screamed, "Char!" But neither his words nor the thought behind them reached Amuro. The instant Amuro's shot hit the Brabro, his nervous system had virtually shut down. In the frenzy of combat, his hypersensitive nervous system had temporarily overloaded, blocking his comprehension of Chalia's thoughts. But now, in a delayed reaction, he had finally realized what Chalia had been trying to do, and had been seized with profound self-loathing. True, he had been stunned by the solar ray attack just before encountering the Brabro, but he had been grossly mistaken in thinking Chalia's attempt at communication was an attack, and then in destroying him.
My God, what have I done?
Memories of Lala Soon and Cusco Al immediately returned. Perhaps it had all been an illusion, a hallucination, but he truly believed they had shown him a vision beyond time, encompassing both the past and the future. If he were truly worthy of them, and if he understood what their lives had meant, then he surely should have been able to understand what Chalia Bull, risking his very life and soul, had tried to convey to him in their brief encounter. It seemed he had learned nothing. Slowly, the significance of what had happened began to sink home.
And he said we had to get out of here.
Amuro sank into a deep, paralyzing despair. The Gundam continued traveling on inertia in a straight line through space. Char Aznable was stunned. "Damn it, Chalia!" he screamed in grief. "It was too soon!" The unthinkable had happened, and Chalia had been destroyed because of his haste. But was their plan destroyed too? Could they still not ensnare the Gundam's pilot? The enemy mobile suit still looked as though it had been The enemy mobile suit looked as though it had been mortally damaged in the showdown with the Brabro. It was drifting seemingly frozen, and the pilot, from all appearances, was unconscious. For a second Char was torn by confusion. Should he abandon his idea and merely follow Kycilia out of the area? If they left such a powerful suit alone, he worried, it would surely come after them and destroy them. The seconds Char wavered gave his enemies an opening. With a wham, a shell from a red gun cannon exploded next to his Richthofen. Then another, and another. His suit shuddered and miraculously survived, yet he felt a sound like that of a howl of wind go through his mind, and knew it was not an hallucination. He knew it came from the gun cannon pilot. He maneuvered his suit to cross in front of the enemy, and then spotted yet another gun cannon closing in on him with breathtaking speed. Instinctively, he knew its rifle was sighted directly on his chest. In a flash, he twisted away, turned back, aimed his beam bazooka, and fired before the gun cannon pilot could adjust. Char's bazooka belched fire. A light suddenly illuminated Hayato Kobayashi's gun cannon. It turned white hot, melted, and dissolved in a ball of light that spread through the black sky in huge rings. Amuro Ray suddenly woke from his semi-conscious state. A terrible scream pierced his mind, and he instantly knew it was Hayato's death cry. He gritted his teeth and experienced his friend's death as if it were his own. But the shock focused his mind again on the battlefield before him. As the light from Hayato's exploding gun cannon swirled into the vacuum of space, expanding farther and farther, he knew what he had to do. He screamed in rage, stomped on the accelerator pedals, jammed the left and right control levers forward, and leapt over the explosion. In his earphones, he could hear Kai weeping. When he checked, he realized the surviving gun cannon was only 50 meters away, below and to his left, but positioned so that the light would blind him to an enemy approach. "Kai!" Amuro yelled. "The red comet's on the other side of the explosion, but he's not an enemy. He's on our side. We've got to help him."
What?
Kai screamed.
But he just killed Hayato!
Ignoring Kai, Amuro turned his Gundam around toward the Pegasus II in the distance and plunged toward it. He activated his front laser sensors and temporarily locked his course. He knew if the Gundam wavered at all, they would never be able to read the message he was about to send. "G3 to Pegasus 2. This is the Gundam. The Red Comet is trying to enlist our help. This area has been targeted for the next laser attack by Gear and Zabi. Leave here immediately. Follow Char Aznable." And then it happened. After evading the gun cannon's explosion, Char again sighted the Gundam, and by its movement realized the pilot had suddenly revived. But so did two other Rickdoms in his unit. Lieutenant Junior Grade Leroy Gilliam and his partner, in charge of maintaining diversionary fire against the Pegasus, had spotted the Gundam's laser sensor signals and targeted their source. As Char watched in horror, they fired their beam bazookas and scored direct hits on the Federation suit. "Leroy!" Char screamed. The Gundam fuselage straightened and then, like hundreds of other suits and ships he had seen before, exploded in a ball of light. "The Gundam finally realized what we're trying to do, Leroy!" he screamed. But Leroy, of course, never heard him. He was left to curse his own carelessness. He had put too much faith in Chalia Bull's ability and too much trust in the young Leroy. He was supposed to be a commander, a leader of men, and now he felt like an utter idiot. His curses echoed in his cockpit as he fell into a paroxysm of self-loathing. Suddenly, in the midst of Char's mental chaos and confusion, an alien thought appeared. "Amuro?" It lasted only a second, but he instinctively knew it had come from the Gundam pilot. And in the same instant another awareness welled up in him, churning through old memories, echoing over and over again, deep in his soul. Lala? Incredibly, he felt as though he had entered another dimension of communication. He could hear her. Commander, I'm so happy to be with you again. I'm grateful to Emerald Ray because this never would have been possible without him. But most of all, I'm grateful to you. You made the connection. You helped me realize my true potential, to realize how far human awareness can expand. Then Shar heard the Gundam pilot again.
I know I was naive, Shar. Shar Aznable. Or should I say Casval Daikun? I'm the one who hung around your sister. The one who killed Lala Soon and Cusco Al. The one who was unable to figure out what you were trying to do and screwed up your plans as a result. What can I say? I'm sorry.
Next, Shar felt the presence of someone else, and to his astonishment, he realized it was Cusco Al. Somehow, Amaral Ray, Lala Soon, and Cusco Al were all alive, and distinct entities in his consciousness. Their presence assaulted his brain like a giant flare.
You were always cute, Commander, because you always tried so hard. You tried so hard to be in control, to be mature, to be a schemer. Compared to you, Amaro was too well behaved. Oh, he was too good.
Shar's experience was real, unique, and transcendent. But he knew it was not a result of his own expanded consciousness. Rather, it resulted from the intensity of the psychic waves that Amaro Ray himself had emitted. Amaro's stored psychic potential had literally exploded. In the midst of this shower of psychic waves, Shar was still able to question his own actions objectively. He was enraged by his own weakness and failure to have helped Lala, Cusco, or even Amaro. To his shock, Amaro's consciousness continued communicating, with Lala Soon and Cusco Al interjecting comments.
I can see why you'd feel that way, Shar. After all, at one point you wanted to kill me, even if it meant betraying your own sister. Frankly, I was always frustrated myself. I felt like I was light years away from Lala Soon or Cusco Al in terms of my development, and I killed them both.
They called him wet behind the ears, Commander.
That's right, Commander. He was just a kid. I should teach him the words to London Bridge. So, anyway, Shar Aznable, my advice to you is to work for a world where people don't die pathetic deaths like I did. For starters, for the sake of all mankind, someone has to get rid of Garen Zabi. I know you can do it. If anyone can, you can.
Shar was overwhelmed. Amaral Ray, you're already dead! He exclaimed. What gives you the right to say anything? If you're so enlightened, why were you so afraid of what Charlie was trying to tell you? Why'd you let yourself be killed by someone as green as Leroy? Then, in a moment of pure perversity, he yelled, You may be in some sort of spirit nirvana now, Amaral Ray, but you'll never get either Lala Soon or Cusco Al. It was his ultimate insult, and he regretted it the moment he said it. Amaro never had time to answer, for his consciousness had already diffused into the cosmos. Lieutenant Junior Grade Leroy Gilliam was also contacted. Psychic waves flowed into his cerebrum, mixed with fleeting, undefined images of two women. The thoughts never formed a solid, logical continuum. As with Amaro when he had first encountered Lala Soon, Leroy Gilliam's mind was overwhelmed by the utter newness of the experience. Is this the Gundam pilot? He said out loud, sensing Amaro's presence.
Laugh if you want, Lieutenant. It is. Don't ever forget, you're like me. You're young, and you make mistakes. But there's no room for mistakes in this game, so be careful. Sometimes, even when the combat's intense, you have to be aware of what's going on outside yourself. Don't be rash. Don't be too self-absorbed.
don't make the same mistakes I made. For some reason, Leroy was later left with a single burning impression that he knew had come directly from Amuro. Later, after everything blurred, he would think, Char's a new type. As Kai Shiden watched, Amuro's suit was enveloped in an explosion even bigger than that which had swallowed Hayato. He raged and wept. But the same psychic resonance that had affected both Char Aznable and Leroy Gilliam seeped into his consciousness too. And it left an even more clearly defined impression. In his mind, Amuro spoke clearly. Hayato was killed, but now you've got to help Char Aznable, Kai. You've got to look beyond the immediate tragedy or everyone will die. Giran Zabi's the real enemy. Then, after Giran, Jaburo.
Damn you, Amuro! Kai sobbed bitterly. Why'd you go off and get killed? Why'd you leave us? Probably 'cause you didn't have an amulet, that's why. Why should I listen to you now?
He knew he couldn't possibly carry out Amuro's wishes alone. He continued raging, but he knew the things Amuro and the other MS pilots had speculated about were more than a dream. They were gradually coming true. The world they knew was changing. Amuro's exploding consciousness had affected everyone in the immediate area with new type potential, suddenly creating a thread of common awareness even among sworn enemies. Kai instinctively knew that he was now linked by a new consciousness with Char. The universe, which for the last few seconds seemed to have frozen, was about to change. With bloodshot eyes, he scanned the space in front of him. In the Pegasus II's main gun turret, Lieutenant Junior Grade Slegger Law suddenly tapped the headset built into his normal suit helmet. A voice, or a thought, had suddenly slipped into his consciousness.
The Red Comet's different from the others, Slegger. You have to follow him now. If you stay here, you're all finished. You must escape from this area. Turn your guns on the true enemy.
Slegger turned around and exclaimed to his men,
Somebody say this area's dangerous?
When no one replied, he checked the space in front of the ship, and to his astonishment saw a huge ring of light spreading through the blackness. Immediately he knew. It was Amuro.
So that, a speechless Slegger realized, was a true new type.
Mirai Yashima was manning the helm as usual when she heard the voice.
Mirai, Char Aznable's not who you think he is. He's got a plan to end the war. Follow him out of this area immediately. Understand? Giran Zabi's next laser attack's intended to take out the entire Abu Aku space fortress with it. You've gotta escape. Go with Char, Mirai. He's right. Concentrate on destroying Giran Zabi. Then Jaburo. That'll end the war. New types have to work together. Amuro! Mirai screamed. Amuro!
That was Amuro? Bright said, staring in shock at the light in the sky. As if in answer, Sayla reported over the comm system in a muffled voice,
It was a direct hit.
Amuro's consciousness had already pierced her mind like a storm, and to her embarrassment she again lost control of her bladder.
Have more confidence in yourself, Sayla. You always pretend to be strong, but you still depend psychologically on your brother. That's not the real you, Sayla. You've made it this far on your own, without Casval. Casval is now Char. You're Sayla. You're an adult. Heck, you even initiated me into adulthood, Sayla.
Sayla detected sadness in his message. She felt her body and mind relax. If only, she wished, it were possible to erase the pain the physical body remembered.
Sayla, I don't want to die alone. I want you. If only I could feel your warmth again. If only you could love me again. Forever. I wish I could take you with me. I don't want to go alone. I don't want to die alone. Sayla.
Not all of Amuro's last thoughts were dedicated to Sayla. There was one other person he had to communicate with, and she knew it, and tried to accept it.
It's it's not like you think, Sayla.
Fra Bow lay semi-conscious in a 10-bed ward of the Luna II military hospital. The night lamp beside her illuminated her trembling form, curled up under her blankets. Suddenly she saw Amuro standing next to her.
Fra, did the fever go away? Yes, Amaro, it did. You look so tired. What happened? What are you doing here? The war's not over yet, is it? No, Fra. I'm here to tell you that I won't be able to see you again. But why? Why now? I thought you'd forgotten about me. I never forgot you, Fra. Really, I never did.
When Fra raised her head from her bed and looked at Amuro, his pilot suit seemed to be glowing gently. He looked almost translucent, but nonetheless real.
How are the kids? It's awful quiet around here without 'em. Forget about them, Amaro. They're fine. You don't have much time, right? You're going away forever, and we'll never meet again, right? Just tell me about yourself. There's nothing to say, really. I just came 'cause I wanted to see you. I was worried, and I hoped you were all right. I'm glad your fever finally went down. Amaro.
Fra held out both arms as if to welcome Amuro, and he bent over and hugged her. She could feel his weight and his warmth throughout her body. It was the first time, she realized, she had ever embraced him like this. Amuro was with her. Amuro was in her heart.
I'll never let you go, Amaro. Never. You're mine, Amaro.
And then she heard words that wrenched her soul.
I'm sorry, Fra, but I'm already dead. No, no, you can't be.
Fra nearly screamed. Her arms, clinging to thin air, suddenly collapsed on her chest.
Please, Amaro, don't go. What'll I do? Please.
Just as Fra realized she was communicating with neither thoughts nor words, Amuro's last message swept over her numbed psyche.
Don't worry, Fra. You'll be all right. Those little kids will keep you busy. They're a gift from God.
Fra Bow finally lost control. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she burst into sobs. There were other things Amuro tried to convey. He tried to explain the first leap in consciousness he had experienced in his encounter with Lala Soon. He tried to demonstrate how one individual's consciousness could fuse with that of another, how, in the process, his consciousness had nearly exploded. His message did not register on everyone, for his thousands of thoughts transpired in an instant, and to separate them into discrete ideas required the ability to interpret vast quantities of information simultaneously. In short, the ability of a potential new type. Without that ability, Amuro's explosion of ideas was merely perceived as thought garbled beyond recognition, like the farewell cry of the thousands of individuals incinerated by the solar ray attack earlier, whose collective thoughts had been felt as a solid wave of terror. But there were potential new types in the area, and they picked up the information relevant to them and sensed the living consciousness of Lala Soon and Cusco Al that existed in Amuro's mind. On the Pegasus II, Lieutenant Bright Noah switched the bridge phone to ship-wide and commanded, "We shall henceforth evacuate the area and proceed directly to the Zeon heartland. All forces are ordered to be on the alert for attacks from Abo Aku, but to refrain from firing on the skirted suits and the Zakus accompanying us. Full speed ahead." Mirai, hands on the helm, energetically replied, "Yes, sir," in acknowledgment. She now trusted her skipper implicitly. He had made precisely the same decision she would have made. "Sailor," Bright ordered, "open a com channel for Shah Raznable, and let General Revel know immediately why we have to leave the area. He's got us under observation from the main armada."
Yes, sir.
Sailor replied, her still trembling hands resting on the switches of the com console in front of her.
Hurry, Bright barked. We don't have a minute to lose.
Shar Aznable, out in space in his Rickdom, lined up his laser sensor sights on the Pegasus II, while Leroy and his other men covered for him. When the laser was correctly calibrated, a voice issued from his headphones saying, "Commander Shar Aznable, this is the Pegasus II. We have decided to leave the air—" Oh, wait, that's his sister.
Commander Shah Raznable, this is the Pegasus II. We have decided to leave the area with you. We await your instructions.
The voice was official sounding, but he immediately knew it was that of his sister, Artesia. After a second of stunned silence, he replied with the information she wanted, telling her the best course to take to avoid the next solar ray attack. Then he added, "But don't expect all your ships to be able to make it. The solar ray's fully capable of strafing us along the way."
We read you, Commander,
Sayla answered. "And I request that the Pegasus follow the Swammel."
Your request is understood,
Sayla replied firmly. When Shar heard how clear and strong his sister's voice was, he felt somehow reassured. They had been separated for years, but he knew that she had developed the strength of character to survive. Sorry about that. Then Shar notified the Swammel that he was leaving the combat area and joining it. In the midst of a raging, Armageddon-sized space battle, a warning from a single ship stood a high probability of being overlooked, especially when both radio and laser transmissions were highly unreliable, and there was no guarantee of the integrity of the information. On General Revel's flagship, the Drog, the crew received a strange, confusing message from the Pegasus II. It eluded Revel's comprehension, for he lacked enough knowledge to put it into its proper context.
It says here, sir, leave area, but I'm not sure what that means, sir. What do you think?
"I don't know either," Revel answered. "It's possible they're leaving in order to avoid another attack from the Principality's laser cannon, but it's hard to see how retreating or changing course would help us at this point. We have to move to a point where Abo Akul provides some cover for us in case another laser attack comes. It's just that we don't know when it'll come."
I don't see how they could try and fire so close to Abo Aku, sir, said one of his aides. It'd be a real mess. They'd never dare.
Revel laughed at his staff officer.
"You're being way too optimistic," he said. "Don't forget there's a man sitting in an easy chair in a room in Zeon with his finger on the button. And all he has to do is move that finger a centimeter, and wham! The laser cannon goes off. It'll go off even if he sneezes. And besides, in a life and death struggle, he's not going to worry if things get a little messy. If I were in Girin Zabi's shoes and thought I had a chance of annihilating most of the Federation force, heck, I'd push the button even if it would generate a few casualties on my own side. Girin can always shed a tear and mourn the Zeon losses later. He can always claim they were for a greater cause, for total victory."
I see your point, sir.
The specter of death hung over the entire area around Abo Aku. The Pegasus II slipped by the space fortress and began following the Swammel. Between Caecilia's fleet and the Pegasus II were Shar Aznable and the 7 mobile suits under his command. The pilots were all silent. All were beginning to understand the true significance of their mission. One, Leroy Gilliam, opened the visor of his pilot suit and wiped tears from his eyes. And he uttered the same words Amaro Ray had uttered before him. "My God, what have I done?" And that's going to do it for this week. Uh, it's not the last installment. We still have another chapter or so, another chapter or two left, the actual final act or final bit. But yeah, it's not every day that you end a series with your plucky protagonist getting whacked and murdered along with a couple of his friends and a whole lot of other people. Never changed, Tomino. Actually, too late. He already has. He's much lighter on the whole kill 'em all thing of late. But oh man, I can't actually listen to the ending theme of Space Runaway Ideon without choking up a little. um, Largely due to the context of the, I think it's Be Invoked is the final Ideon movie, which kind of rejiggers the ending a bit. Um, it's still the same ending, but it adds a lot more detail and context, and it's just, whew, oh my gosh, that one's a doozy. Not only does everyone die there, spoilers, uh, literally the entire universe is annihilated. Um, and there's visual imagery that goes along with that, which is the reason it's so impactful. Hoi polloi. So yeah, this is a bit of a doozy. Um, yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. Y'all have fun now. Um, Not much to say. So things, as you can see, if you've watched the original series, they're a bit different, ever so slightly changed. You know, protagonist being dead and all. Um, Before the final act, or during the final act, but before the actual ending. So yeah, sweet dreams. Urgh. But at least he was able to communicate to basically all of his loved ones, barring his mother because she's on Earth. I think she's still alive in this one. Um, his father has basically no role in this other than, oh, he was a colony designer. In the original series, he has a bit more role in that Tem Ray is the actual designer of the Gundam mobile suit, as well as I think the gun cannon and the gun tank at that point. Um, and there's a brutal emotional scene, and he winds up basically having brain damage from oxygen deprivation, and shows up again later in the series in this brutal scene where he's like, I've put together a special chip that'll make the Gundam a super weapon that can defeat Zeon forever. It'll fight for justice and all sorts of other things. And Emero's like, man, I don't know who you are. Like you're not my father, and you didn't particularly love me beforehand, and really you only care about your giant robot. So peace. Then his father like falls down some stairs and dies. It's just utterly callous. Uh, Yoshiyuki Tomino, when he wants to really hammer something home, he doesn't shy away. He will be just straight up callous disregard for sometimes even for good taste. It's like, oh come on, dude. He's historically suffered from depression like his entire life, and that shows through in certain works more than others. It kind of boils down to how well was he coping, how well medicated was he. He is in a much better spot now, um, and has been for decades. So he's doing okay, but he's old, and we've got a bunch of big names in the OG anime creating community that have died over the last couple of years, including Leiji Matsumoto. Uh, so it's, I know I'm going to be just absolutely distraught when Tomino dies. I know I will. I hope some other people will as well, but they don't make them like that anymore. They don't. They don't. They just don't. Part of it's because of the time period he grew up in. post-war, post-World War II Japan was, especially when he was, I think he was at that point. Oh yeah, he was a young man at that point, in his teens maybe I think when World War II ended. So that profoundly affected him, as it would. At any rate, I'm going to call it there. We will do the last installment next Monday, probably, I hope. I do have a possible scheduling conflict coming up. I will know later in the week whether that's going to happen. I hope to get it in because it should be a relatively short segment. Um, and I might be able to beg off from a responsibility or two in order to get it in. But other than that, that'll do it. I still don't know what I'm going to do for this Wednesday. Y'all just have to stick around and see. At any rate, that's me done for today. Hope y'all enjoyed, even though it was an emotional tour de force. Kind of a bummer. But yeah, stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other as best you can. See you all next time. Bye bye.